Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast, a place for conversations around all things food, eating, body image and nourishment. Here we'll explore and unpack all the things that gets in the way of us having a kind, compassionate relationship with food and eating in our bodies, and also how we can find our way back to joyful nourishment in our everyday lives. I'm your host, Lynn Thorstenson, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland, and I am so glad that you're here. Welcome to this solo episode of the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. And in this episode, I really wanted us to look at kind of what diet culture is and how it's affecting our relationship with food, eating, in our bodies. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk about diet culture is, if I'm going to be honest, like even when I moved into this space as a professional, having trained as a nutritional therapist, and then deciding to work primarily with people around their relationship with food, eating, and body image, like in the beginning, like say going back maybe 10 years ago or so, I didn't hear that much conversations around diet culture, or it simply wasn't, at least not on my radar. What I felt was that there was a lot of conversation around how these things would manifest for the individual and some of the underlying causes or reasons why an individual would develop a difficult relationship with food and eating and in their bodies. But it just didn't seem to be that much conversation, or maybe I just wasn't looking in the right places, but around sort of the socio-cultural part and what we have named diet culture, and how that would also have such a big impact on us as an individual when it comes to how we relate to food, our eating experience, and how we relate to our bodies and the relationship we have with our bodies. So I'm somebody who believes that eating disorders, disordered eating, is a biopsychosocial disorder. It has many components. I don't particularly view it as a mental illness alone. I think there is psychological underpinnings for sure, and it shows up with psychological difficulties, and that fits into the mental health space or mental illness space, if you want to call it that. But there's also physiology that is driving part of this. So the malnourishment, the starvation, the restriction, all has physiological impacts on the body, on our physiology. And the part that I wanted to talk about today is really then the social aspect of it, that there is also the environment that we live in. And of course, our caregivers, our parents, they still live in the same culture. So even when there has been an influence of, which is not the case for all people who struggle around their relationship with food and eating, but when there's been, dieting from a young age because of well-meaning parents, and also the cultural messages that we all swirl around it, like even when we've had this experience because we grew up with dieting mothers or fat phobic parents or fat phobic grandparents, that influenced how they positioned food for us. I think they still live in the same culture. So I'm not saying here that we're here to necessarily blame parents or grandparents or the caregivers for how a relationship with food has turned out. We can have compassion for them, knowing that they've grown up in this similar kind of culture and are influenced by the same messages that we are today, and the messages that we are trying to untangle ourselves from as we're on this healing journey. So I didn't hear much about it, but what is then, what is diet culture? How do we define it? So I picked a definition here that I came across by Shelby Gordon from a presentation that she did on weight stigma in healthcare for the Center for Mindful Eating in June 2023. So the definition that she uses is diet culture refers to a rigid set of expectations about valuing thinness and attractiveness over physical health and emotional well-being. Diet culture often emphasizes good versus bad foods, focuses on calorie restriction, and normalizes self-deprecating talk. Diet culture is toxic and it can be a risk factor for body dysmorphia, disordered eating, and other mental health issues. And also to note, and again, I am still on a learning journey with all of this, as you might be, and it's noting that diet culture has roots in racism, colonialism, eugenics, and that this system of body hierarchies are embedded in our cultural fabric, and it is really everywhere. So part of the reasons, it's not always the sole reason, but it can be one of the contributing factors that sort of tips us over the edge or gets us thinking, and that if I don't feel comfortable in my body, about my body, there's this message all over the place that is telling me consciously and subconsciously, like very overt or covert, a bit more subtle, that if I could get control over my body, if my body would just look like the current conventional beauty standards, everything will be okay. I will be liked, I will have money, I'll be successful, life will be really good. And I think when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, this is pre-social media, which makes me feel really old when I think about it. But the messaging that thin is in was still there, but it wasn't so in your face in the same sense, because most of the exposure was on advertising, in magazines, and then of course we would be exposed to it at home or in surrounding environments if we had caregivers, family members who would be dieting, who'd already be bought into this process. I can still remember as a teen being fixated on my body, and I think maybe this is also part of because our bodies are, particularly as females, our bodies are changing as we are moving into puberty and going through puberty. And these changes that happens to our body as part of this process, our bodies are literally changing. They're supposed to. And that can feel so uncomfortable because it's so different. And we're just getting used to our bodies being different. But in the midst of that, and a way of trying to deal with this discomfort, just the aspect of that there's something outside myself that is tangible, that can help me control, or at least give me a sense of control when things feel outside of my control, is so alluring. It just, on one level, it makes perfect sense until we end up in a place where our relationship with food is not in control. We'll feel really out of control. But I think, I grew up, I knew that, models and bodies were airbrushed and things. And I suppose, I knew that, but I didn't really understand how much of this is like driven from a way of making money, that the beauty industry is worth, and the diet industry is worth something like, there's different figures floating around, but around $50 to $77 billion annually, which is a huge amount of money. And that means that when we are feeling insecure about our bodies, somebody is making money off that. And that's, again, not to say that, how we want to dress, if we want to wear makeup or do things to our bodies, we can do that if that feels life enhancing. But we also have to be aware that, maybe we have consumed some of these messages. And it's also kind of like this thing that, I don't think I ever questioned why I so much wanted my body to be different to what it was, why I wanted it to look a specific way, why I wanted it to be smaller. I didn't kind of question, like, where do these values come from? Like, where did I pick them up? And I think that can be really helpful, because are these our own internal values, or these somebody else's values? And which ones do I want to hold on to? And if you have internalized these messages that thin is better and being thin at all costs is desirable, and that is going to make your life easier and it's going to give you a lot of things, then that is, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. This just means that we've internalized the messages from this cultural obsession with thinness, and also alongside that there's weight stigma and weight oppression that is still, that is ongoing every day. And your life might be easier if your body is smaller. That might be a real reality, and that might protect you from certain levels of weight stigma and weight discrimination. So that's real, and your wants or desires of your body to be different are totally valid, and holding those alongside this, knowing that the dieting doesn't work, is so hard. And a lot of the work is kind of holding those opposites at the same time, I think. So when we talk about diet culture as well, is to realize that it really hurts everyone. And this is why I think for us as a collective, wanting to move through that, wanting to move forward from that, it's like realizing that no matter what your body looks like or what size your body is currently at, it still hurts everyone. But it proportionally hurts people in larger bodies more because of the weight stigma, unsolicited body comments, unsolicited weight loss advice at the doctor's office when somebody's coming in for something totally unrelated, stereotyping. But of course it also, so like that's there's no argument with that. And I think part of dismantling diet culture is part of like really pushing back against this stereotyping, this discrimination, and that's, working towards a world where all bodies are cared for and valued just by existing. And then if that's where you find yourself, wanting your body to be smaller to shield from that, that is so valid and so understandable. So, that there's nothing wrong with you if that's what you want and desire, because I feel sometimes, again, in the non-diet spaces, that doesn't always come across, that the desire of wanting things to be different is totally okay. It's how we pursue that or how we work with that when we know that dieting just isn't effective long term, and that it can also be harmful. And if we want to heal our relationship with food, it's just doesn't work. The two of those are at opposite ends of each other. Diet culture, of course, also hurts people in smaller bodies because of the fat phobia that we've internalized and the fear of weight gain, even when weight gain is actually a necessity for health, for, living in a body that's actually healthier. Weight gain is not always bad. And is it bad at any time? I don't know. But it's that kind of, because we have all, observed these messages of like, you can never be thin enough. So people in smaller bodies still feel this need to diet. And this is what's kind of maybe looks crazy on the outside from a person who's never been caught in this cycle. I mean, there are a few. That even people in smaller bodies still feel like they're not thin enough, or that their bodies aren't good enough or up to scratch, or that there's stuff that is wrong with them. And if their body was just a little bit smaller or they weighed a little bit less, things would be fine. And so the messaging that we've internalized is the same across the board, regardless of what somebody's body actually look like. But externally, the weight stigma and weight oppression and discrimination is only happening to people who live in bodies that don't fit societal norms. So I want to be clear about that. But if we just could imagine living in a world where nobody really cared what other bodies look like, and bodies across the spectrum was accommodated in spaces, there was adequate seating that was comfortable, whether it's on a plane or in a restaurant or in a doctor's office, so that this wasn't a thing, or that this wasn't something that was so focused on. And I suppose that our internal sense of self-worth wasn't so heavily tied to what our bodies look like and what our weight was. Maybe some of these eating issues that I help people with would just not really be a thing. And I do want to share with you here that it is my vision that maybe one day I will be out of a job because this isn't something that people are struggling with anymore. So divesting or moving away from diet culture and dieting is something that we really have to work on when we, or if you want to heal your relationship with food, and healing this internalized fat phobia, which also helps us to create a better body image or release some of that body image distress, will always be an inside job. Because we might think that for me to feel more comfortable in my body, I will if I can just fix it or change it or alter it so that it fits. And maybe momentarily I will feel better, but because our bodies are these living, breathing, malleable, ever-changing things, even if I do feel more elated or more comfortable when my body feels a certain way, that is always going to be quite precarious because my body is changing. It can change at any time due to illness, medication, aging, injuries, you name it. They change. They're meant to change as well. And so if you can work on changing how you think about your body and building capacity for being comfortable in your body and the experience of living through your body, that is what's going to improve your body image in the long term. That's what's going to give a more grounded place to kind of navigate all of this from. And the other thing that I suppose I wanted to mention here too is that beauty standards really shift over time. And if you look back, I've seen a couple of different things online over the years where somebody did like a little video of pictures of women's body. We mostly talk about women's body here because most of the time the focus has been on that over, I think, about 100-year span. And you could just see how it's gone from curvy to thin to curvy to thin to different kind of accentuating different features of the body's big booties or big boobs or small waist. And that it's always changing depending on what's trendy. So most of us might never fit to that. And even people who do fit to whatever happens to be the conventional beauty standards often find themselves then living in worries that this is going to be taken away because, again, our bodies are changing. So hanging our self-worth on what our bodies look like is always going to be precarious kind of ground. And I think that's one of the things that I want to bring home to you. And that's not to say that working on establishing a better relationship with our bodies is easy. I think it's an ongoing practice. And I see that even for myself, as somebody who I would consider having been, recovered for God, at least 15 years, then, I still find myself negative about my body, or thinking, oh God, if it was this way or that way, maybe things would be better or different. But the difference is that I just noticed the thinking, and I noticed what are the things that I can do to take care of myself, and what are our behaviors and habits and stuff that feels helpful. And also knowing that actively dieting is just not an option for me ever again, because that would do so much damage to my relationship with food, that I'm just not willing to sacrifice. And I know for sure that is going to be, it's just not going to work for me in that sense. And I am very protective of my relationship with food these days, because it took a long time to get here. And feeling free and being able to enjoy food and having lovely experiences around it, and not be thinking about it most of the time either, and just being able to live my life without consumed by this. I'm protective of that, and I don't want to, it's not a road that I want to go back to. So even dietary changes that could potentially have impacts on my health, if they are too restrictive, it just won't work for me. I just can't do it, because it would just jeopardizing my relationship with food too much. So that's a little bit about me in that thinking. So I have a question for you that I would like you to think about, and that would be, if you spent the next week just paying attention to see where diet culture shows up in your daily life. Yeah, where do you notice it? Is this something that you've been, have you been thinking about this already? Or is there something, is this new? Because the thing is that when you start paying attention to it, you will find it everywhere. Like, it's of course, in the obvious places, like commercials, advertising, billboards, those kinds of things. But more so, you tend to start noticing in everyday conversations with friends, family, colleagues. And what I have seen happening when I've had these discussions with my clients, and they're on this trajectory or moving away from diet culture, is that it can be so lonely, because this is how we socialize as women. This is how we kind of connect and bond with one another over what we've eaten or didn't eat, or what we're thinking about eating, or if somebody's present something, say something that's sugary, and maybe tasty, is you will hear these things like, oh, I'm really trying to be good, so I really shouldn't, but then they proceed to eat the muffin or cake anyway. Or, blank refuse, no, I'm on this time, I'm trying to, lose a few pounds, or I'm minding my health, or any version of those. Or if you decide to eat the thing, and if people have opinions about your choices or what your body looks like, or you might hear things like, are you sure you should really be eating that now? Have you not had enough already? Or, I wouldn't if I were you. Or, oh, okay. Oh, yeah, well, somebody's got a great appetite, or any number of those kinds of comments, which are really not helpful either. And this is to say that if you want to eat the cake, go ahead, do it, enjoy it. And if you feel like actually, you generally don't want it right now. You could say, look, I've just eaten, it looks delicious, and could you save some for me for later? And there is things as well that we do get to say no, just stuff that we just generally don't like eating. But it's always to be aware of where is the intention behind the decision coming from. Because I can say yes out of obligation, but it's like, oh, I didn't enjoy it. Or I can say no from internal pressure or restriction for myself when I actually want to say yes. And sometimes saying no to something like that when we want to say yes, it will just result as us eating the stuff when nobody's watching. So there's so much of this, but what's really wonderful is when you go and have a meal with people and nobody is commenting on the food other than how delicious it is or something they want to try or being excited about the meal and sharing foods and or maybe the conversation isn't about food at all. That is rare and it's so enjoyable. And it just means that there's lots of space for conversations. That has nothing to do with what's on somebody's plate or whether they eat it or don't eat it. So, and diet culture also gives us this kind of side serving of feeling guilty about what we're eating. So even if we enjoy something, and genuinely enjoy it and it's pleasurable. But if it's kind of a food that's been put in this category of bad by diet culture, and that can change depending on what diet trends are trending. Even if I'm eating it and enjoying it with a group of other people or even on my own, I might still feel this like, oh yeah, I know I really shouldn't be enjoying this though. And you feel guilty. You feel guilty for eating it. And it's like, but it's food. And if you enjoy it, what's wrong with that? Can we just enjoy the food and move on? Or if we eat something we don't enjoy it, we just make a mental note of that and go, yeah, no, that didn't suit me. Or sometimes we have the experience of eating something that's enjoyable and it tastes good, but then we'll get a stomach cramp or headache or something afterwards. So our body kind of goes, yeah, I didn't enjoy that much, but the mouth maybe did. So, that's information that can help you make informed choices of what sounds good or what doesn't. But anyway, back to the conversation where diet culture shows up in daily life. Yes, I invite you to start paying attention, unless you're doing this already, and to see where is it showing up and what are the conversations and with people that it's more likely to show up and where people are really talking about the latest diets they're doing or the foods they're eating or not eating or any of those things. And is there other conversations that can be had, particularly if you're in a space where you're trying to move away from this and you don't want to be talking about it because it's just not really helpful for your own journey of trying to heal your relationship with food and eating. See if you find yourself in that situation. I think there's a couple of things we can do. One is to kind of try to say nothing and just be quiet and just think about something else. Another one is to try to steer the conversation in a different direction. A third one might be to say, look, I don't find this particularly interesting. I'm trying to not talk about diets or dieting. I'm moving away from dieting. So is there something else we can talk about? If people are open to and you want to discuss why you're doing that and you feel ready for that, sure, then you can do that. But we don't always want to go in those direction either, depending on company, the people, how well you know people and stuff like that. And then if it just doesn't stop, just remove yourself from the conversation. Just leave the room, go outside, do something different, because if it is too much and you're really trying to protect yourself and your own boundaries around this, sometimes the only thing that is possible is to leave. Yeah, I don't have a lot of diet culture talk in my own life at present. However, I am surprised how it still shows up sometimes just randomly in just comments, even when it's not actually used as a bonding, but just it's like, it's so insidious. And I think we're so used to sort of saying, saying these things, oh yeah, I'm trying to be good, or I really shouldn't, but I'm just going to do it just for today, tomorrow I'll be good again, or whatever, any of that sort of nonsense. So the other thing that can happen as well is like when we stop engaging in these conversations with people, we might find that we don't have all that much to talk about with the same people, because maybe this was always the main topic of conversation. So when we are moving towards something else and we don't want to have these conversations anymore, we could find it harder to kind of connect with people if you are in environments at work, for example, where this tends to be how people are socializing. So yeah, I recognize that can leave things a little bit challenging, because I've had people say that it's like, well, I don't know what to talk about with my colleagues anymore now, because they all just want to talk about dieting and I'm not interested. So, yeah, that's okay to you as well if you find yourself in that space. I do want to mention as well that when we're trying to move away from dieting and diet culture, a lot of things can come up. It can be, we might feel angry. We might feel that we've been duped when we learn about and understand the more oppressive nature of diet culture. One of the things that I've seen happening too, and for me, it was like when I learned about diet culture, health at every size, non-diet, weight inclusive care, was that that approach really felt as a natural alignment with my personal professional values. So it wasn't a difficult move to just step away from it. But when you stop dieting, you might also feel that it can get sticky, that you don't want to partake in this anymore for different reasons, and you would still want your body to look and feel different to how it currently is. So, because like if dieting doesn't work, what does that mean? Am I stuck with this body that I don't like the look of? And with that, a lot of things can come up, like anger, grief, sadness, frustration, and maybe even hopelessness can be part of the journey initially. And I think sometimes it's important to hold all of those feelings and realize that they're really valid too. And sometimes we have to go back and do just one more diet before, if I could just lose a few more pounds, a few more kilos, then I'll come back and I'll work on my relationship with food. That's fine. If that's where you find yourself, that's fine. You get to decide what's right for you and when it's right for you. But I do want to mention that a lot of things can come up, and sometimes people also end up in this space where the body says no to further diets and restrictions, and even the mere thought of another restriction or starting another diet can just send them into a sense of panic, or just like, and even find themselves binging. And I think when that happens, when when we're in that real diet rock bottom, and particularly when it's like more of a somatic experience, it's like the body just says, no, I can't do any more restriction. I'm done with the famines. I know the food is available. I just cannot do it. And that put us in that same place of like, I can't do it, but what am I going to do now? And often this is where people find their way to my door. It's like, I can't diet anymore. I know it's not helpful, but I just really don't know what to do. And I don't know what to do with the feelings of still wanting my body to change. And we can work through all of those things. So this is, I suppose, saying that, it can be really helpful to get support if that's where you find yourself. And if you're listening to this podcast episode, what I do want to do is to offer you hope and reassurance that things can really get better. and that it's possible to find peace even in a body that doesn't look like you think it should. And I suppose thinking about that, healing our relationship with food, eating in our bodies, is not really about trying to fix ourselves from our bodies or ourselves or our bodies. Like if that sort of approach worked, I don't think you would be struggling. And I think if it worked, it would also be like a one and done thing. So dieting are really selling us a short-term solution at best and a harmful illusion at worst. So part of this work, when we're working to heal our relationship with food, eating in our bodies, and moving away from this eating distress towards a place of joyful nourishment, is about understanding that these messages that we've internalized are often not ours, but it's something that we've consumed by living in this toxic culture that has an obsession with thinness and value thinness and beauty over physical health and mental well-being. And it's really about not fixing ourselves, but actually being open and changing, exploring how we think and care for our bodies, and bringing compassion and care, like deep self-care, rather than approaching things from this external place and this place of restriction and fear. So I also think one of the things when I might have spoken about in my own story in the very first episode of this podcast series is that eating issues gives us so much shame, and it tends to be a very lonely and isolating experience. And when I was in the midst of it myself, I didn't really tell anybody. I don't know if anybody knew how bad it really was at the time. And often what I hear from people that I work with this as well is like, how do they say, you might never have heard this story before? It's like, well, only hundreds of times. But people are trying to be secretive and hiding and making sure nobody finds out, because there's so much shame attached to it as well. And I just want to say that if this is you, it's like, know that you're not on your own. And there is a lot more conversation about it now, I think, than there was 10 years ago. Or maybe it's just me because I'm in this bubble, personally and professionally. But also that it's not your fault. And it's not just an individual issue. It's a really also collective issue due to this pervasiveness of diet culture. So like shame makes us feel like we're inherently flawed, and it keeps us stuck. And reaching out or asking for help and support doesn't make you weak. It makes you really brave and courageous. And no, I think I just want to, if you're just taking one thing away from this conversation today, is just know that you are worthy just as you are. Your body is worthy, and your body was never the problem. The culture is the problem. So I hope this has been helpful. And again, thank you so much for listening today. Come and join me over on the Joyful Nourishment Substack community. And if you have questions, leave them there. Again, thank you so much for being here. It's so appreciated. Enjoy the rest of your week. Take care. Thank you for listening to Joyful Nourishment. This podcast is produced solely by me with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, it really helps this podcast to help others if you click like, subscribe, or leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on. And of course, you can also subscribe so that you won't miss any future episodes. Find out more about what I do in my private practice and what I offer over on straightforwardnutrition.com. And I am currently taking on new clients, so you will find a link to book in for a free 30-minute session in the show notes if this is something you're interested in. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack by subscribing to my newsletter.